Good morning, everyone. How are you? For those of you who I have not met, my name is Tricia Cunningham, and my husband Greg is picking up books around there. We have two kids. My son is Chris. He's 29. He's an accountant currently working at Chuck E. Cheese, and not actually in Chuck E. Cheese, but in the accounting office of Chuck E. Cheese. And my daughter is actually online, Carrie Hood. She's married to Zach, and she is a teacher in Frisco. And for those of you who may watch at 1 o'clock this afternoon on ABC, I'll embarrass her. She's not here to do so, but her and a fireman and a nurse are going to be singing the national anthem for the national football game. So we're hoping it gets broadcast, but anyway, that was pretty cool. So Russell told me to sort of leave him 5 to 10 minutes this afternoon to be able to teach, but he did ask me to share a little bit about the devotional. I'm just going to hit the high points, honestly, just because 5 to 10 minutes, it really, God has just really, through the years, worked, and it's, hindsight is so great whenever you can go back and you can look and see how God has sort of laid out a plan, because I can tell you where I'm at today is truly because of divine intervention. And over this past year, I actually, for those of you who don't know, I'm the CEO of the North Texas Food Bank. And over the past year, it has been a whatever it takes year. And it has been, we have increased our food distribution about 73% year on year. We went in, before the pandemic, we were providing access to about 77 million meals a year, and there was still a hunger gap in our community. This fiscal year, which ends at the end of June, we'll be providing access to about 130 million meals. And so what that has meant is that our team has had to do whatever it takes to make sure that we can make sure there's no one hungry in our community. And I can tell you, after having been in this job for so long, what this has proven to me is that God will provide. He will provide the resources. He will provide the people. He will provide those who are generous. He will provide those on our team that have the whatever it takes spirit to make sure that we get things done. And he will always be able to provide for the needs in our community. I can tell you, whenever I first came into the food bank, that there were a lot of misperceptions, I think, about what was going on in our community, because typically hunger was hidden in our community. Hunger was something that you didn't normally see, especially, honestly, right here in our bubble. We don't see hunger that frequently in our face, but it could be the person who is waiting on you. It could be the person who is checking you out at the grocery store. A lot of people think it's the one that's out on the street corner that's begging for food. We do serve the homeless, and that is an important population, but people are surprised whenever I tell them that it's only about 5% of who we serve. Most of the people who we serve are the working poor. It's the children of those families. We provide this program called Food for Kids, which is a backpack program that provides food for the weekend, because oftentimes in the school districts in the 13 counties that we serve, many of them don't have access to food on the weekend. They get their food at school. And this has been a real challenge, especially during the pandemic as well. But I think what happened in the pandemic is a lot of people saw hunger for the first time, because everyone pretty much knows someone who has been impacted by the pandemic economically. People have lost their jobs. People haven't been able to get work. We saw in November, our largest distribution that we did as a food bank was at Fair Park, and we had done several of them over time. We had over 25,000 people that we fed in about 4 hours, because the needs have just been so great. And I can tell you, there were Mercedes in the line, there were Cadillacs. People have been able to live, and they've been able to make it week to week. But whenever something catastrophic happens, they don't know where else to turn. People, about 40% of who we have served during the pandemic, have never needed access to charitable food assistance before. And so we actually work with Boston Consulting Group, a firm that sort of helped us early on try to predict, okay, so what are we looking at? When do we think this is going to be over? And their projection, based upon it being, oh, well, we should be back to normal by end of the year. And that was last year, right? And obviously we're not back to normal yet. But what they had told us during that time is to be able to expect at least a 2-year economic tail on increased needs overall. So I will tell you, we are reworking our strategy right now. We want to make sure that we continue to have the resources to be able to provide for our community, because it is certainly our goal that no one goes hungry. And then we're also trying to work with organizations, new organizations that are trying to address the root cause issues of why people are hungry. Typically, it has to do with their underemployed. Maybe they need a new career choice. So there's a lot of workforce development programs. We're working with hospitals. We're going to have a pilot at Children's Hospital. So many families go there with their children who are in need. And we're working with them to put an on-site pantry because many of them don't have access to the food that they need to be able to help them to get healthy. We're working with some senior programs. We're working with other financial organizations that are helping financial wellness. And then we also have about 250 partner agencies that currently have some type of a feeding program or a congregate meal program or some other kind of feeding program that we provide about 80% of the food for those partners. And we're also trying to make sure that they have access to some of the services that are in their community that can help their clients come there. And about 80% of the food that we send out goes to those partners, and we want that because we want them to be able to go there, to be able to have their needs met, and then they can have their holistic needs. And so let me sort of think about this a little bit from a God thing. You know, I spent 30 years at Texas Instruments before I went to the North Texas Food Bank. And I said this was divine intervention because I certainly could not have planned this path for myself. I thought I'm going to retire from TI. This is where I'm going to retire from. But I think part of the lesson that Russell brought in today is about being content. Sometimes it's not about being content. Sometimes you sort of get that feeling where you're not content. And that's God giving you that little nudge saying, hey, listen to me. Oh, you know, go away, God. You know, I really don't need that. Oh, hello, listen to me. And that started about 2 years before I left TI. And I say left, I graduated, I retired. I called it graduated whenever I had my party at the end of the year. But I had that feeling of incontentment that I needed to do something else. And I was so fortunate and blessed to be at a company like TI. They gave me so many training opportunities, so many opportunities to lead, so many opportunities to develop skill sets. I learned strategy. I managed our crisis communications and our crisis process. I did mergers and acquisitions. I did, you know, public affairs. I did product marketing. I did all these kind of things. My last role there was Chief Citizenship Officer. And in that role, I got to travel the world and be able to take a program that was very Dallas-centric and make it global. And so I went to China, I went to India, I went to all these places that I visited before, but I got to see it through a different lens. And I got to see what needs were in each of those countries. And sometimes whenever God gives you information, it makes you feel like you need to take action on that. I'd also served on nonprofit boards for many years as well too. So going to the nonprofit, you know, I was eyes wide open. I knew what it meant to go to a nonprofit. But that discontentment continued to well up. And so finally, you know, God just sort of hits you over the head sometimes. And Greg will probably remember as January 2016, I'd had a conversation with my management and told them that I wanted to make sure that, you know, these are the kinds of things that I was interested in doing. Here's the challenges that were going forward. And there wasn't an alignment there. And what I wanted to do, my job was basically, it's like, okay, you've done your job. Now we just need to run and maintain. And that's not how I am. I'm a fixer. I like to go in. I like challenges. I like new things. I like to be able to move things forward. And I really had one of those, you know, literally reading the Bible, you know, how that wrestle with God moment. One whole night I was there and I was wrestling with God all night. And I got up the next morning. I never said a word to Greg except on my way out in the garage. I had tears in my eyes and I just said, I can't do this anymore. And he just said, whatever you think, you know, I'm here, I'm supportive of you. And so I went in and I told my manager that day, and I just said, you know, I said, I will see through my 2016 objectives. I knew they didn't have a successor for me. And I'll see through 2016, but I said, it's certainly my desire to be able to retire at the end of 2016 and graduate. And so, you know, we worked through that. And so I started networking and talking to people sort of middle of the year and just sort of keeping my options open. I had a few things I was interested in doing, but one thing was certainly getting into a position where I could help better lift up the community. And I did not know at the time that the person who led the food bank was going to be stepping down from the food bank. Unfortunately, she got terminal brain cancer. She was a fierce leader. She had led it for over 20 years. And the week of my graduation party at TI was the week that she announced that she was going to be stepping down from the food bank. Even then, I didn't put together that this is where I was going to be. I actually had another job offer from another nonprofit It wasn't the right one, and thankfully it wasn't the right one because this is where I'm supposed to be. But I turned it down. I had been interviewing then for 4 other positions at the same time I was interviewing for the food bank. But Greg will tell you that he knew before I did that this was the position because this was the only one where I continued to get excited. Actually, some of my final interviews, I was sitting in the lobby and I texted Russell and I said, hey, guess where I'm at right now? Because the interviews were held at the Pro campus. And that's where, and he knew some people that I didn't even know because I would check them out. I did all my research and things. So certainly it is divine intervention. I did spend quite a bit of time working with youth. And Lynn and I were just talking about this just before we started here and talking about youth. But you know, the thing I've learned about youth, and Greg and I both spent many years working in children's and youth ministry before our kids graduated and we turned it over to other parents to be able to do that. But I was sitting in church this morning and they're going to be having their Disciple Now weekend coming up in June. And you know, oftentimes I learn as much as the kids do whenever I go through this. And I went back and I found my notes yesterday because I used to keep a little notebook, and whenever Lynn and Sean and Greg and I were working with that age group that her daughter and their daughter was the Disciple Now that I was at. And last week, whenever Dave and Debbie were talking, Dave was talking about being bold. And I think, Dawn, you even mentioned about being bold as well in your faith. Well, in that Disciple Now, the pastor was talking about being bold in your faith for Christ. And I happened to think, and I wrote down in my notes an acrostic for what, at that point in time, what being bold meant to me. And so I'll share that with you a little bit, but like I said, this was for me. I shared it with the girls, and we talked about being bold that whole next year that was their senior year, that this was for me. This was some of my own medicine I had to take. B is you have to believe God. There's a difference in believing in God and believing God. And so you have to believe God. And so whenever God equips you and he gives you skills and he gives you things that you have to be able to do, you have to believe him that he's going to be there. During this pandemic, I had to believe God was going to provide for all the people. I had to believe that God was going to get us through. And so you have to believe God and you have to believe his words. Oh, you have to be obedient and you have to be open. You know, Mona and Hank, would you have gone off to Croatia and done things if you hadn't been obedient and obey God? Now, I'm not being called to do that, but everybody in this room is being called to do something. And you have to be obedient to that. And I can tell you, God was just like pulling me out and telling me, okay, here it is, here it is, here it is. I had to listen to him myself. I would not be where I'm at if I had not listened to him. And I didn't know what I was going to do. It was 6 months after I left TI before I ended up at the food bank in July. I just knew I wasn't supposed to be there anymore. And that's where I ended up. But I'm grateful for all the work that I was able to do there because I learned strategy and I learned so many things that today I'm applying every one of those skills. L, you have to love others. And loving others means you have to lean in, you have to listen. On my wall in my office, I have love your neighbors as yourself. That's what I do by providing food. I'm showing love to my neighbors. It doesn't say judge your neighbors as you would someone else. It doesn't say that. I'm not supposed to judge them. I'm supposed to love them. And by giving them food, I'm able to love them. One of the other things that I'll tell you about those 250 partners that we have, over 70% of them are faith-based. So that means you meet their immediate basic needs. Then that organization, most of them are through churches, then that organization has the opportunity to be able to share more with them about their spiritual needs as well. And that's that's part of that loving, process. And then D is being disciplined and differentiate yourself. It's okay to be different. You need to continue to discipline yourself. And this is something I fall short of a lot, is to be able to be disciplined and be able to do that. So anyway, that's about being bold. That was a little bit about my, how I got to where I was. And, I've learned a lot during this pandemic time about generosity in particular. So we've learned that people are giving beyond their means sometimes. There's a gentleman here at our church that he gives $10 about once every 3 months. And that $10 to him, I know is as much as probably $10,000 to someone else, but he always calls it in, and he always says, please make sure Tricia knows, I'm a friend of Tricia's, let her know that I'm praying for her with that $10 note. We have on the other extreme, we have a gentleman that he's a Christian as well too, and he's been very blessed financially. And he and his wife, they are part of an Asian church, but they believe in giving 50% of everything that they earn back to the community. And so he's not ever not given a gift lower than 7 figures. You know, so you have different levels of generosity that are out there, but it's not just generosity of financial resources. People have been extremely generous with their time and their skills. I know Greg, he worked a lot this year out in the mobile pantries, and he worked alongside a gentleman. He kept seeing them there, and he said, why are you here? He said, well, I'm out of work. I want to be able to give back. We've had people that have received food that have come to volunteer with us because they don't want to have a handout. They want to make sure that they can do something productive to be able to give back as well. And so, you know, Mr. Breakbill over there, he came and volunteered with us whenever he was out of work for a while, and we were so appreciative for that. You know, I think people want to be able to give back and are generous with their time as well too. But I just want to say thank you, you know, and a couple of years ago before I left TI, there was a gentleman that was managing our community affairs, and we were at a dinner one night that was actually going to be honoring him. And my verse of the day, I shared with him, and he said, no, no, no. He said, that's for you. I was like, what do you mean? Well, this past year, I've leaned into this verse, and this is what he meant. And this is Ephesians 6:6. Let us not grow weary of doing good, for in good season we will reap. If we do not give up, we will reap. So then, as we have the opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are in the household of faith. There's been a lot of times this past year, I've grown weary, I've been tired, I've been exhausted. And I know all of you've been there as well too, but we can't give up. Thank you.
We want a little more me in here. Is that what you're doing, Doug? That's awesome. So we are closing down Philippians today. This is the last part of Philippians. This has been a book about joy and how to control the mind. And as we kicked off this chapter, although chapters weren't in the letter that Paul wrote, as we kicked off this chapter, there was an address by Paul to the Philippians that said, "Beloved, whom I love, my joy and my crown, I long to see you." And I went back and I just started thinking about how much he loved these people. And this is in essence a thank you note. I don't know if you know, but in Roman Greco society, there wasn't really a form of thank you. And so he is thanking the Philippians, and he loves, just truly loves them. And I started thinking, you know, I don't express love very well, although that was one of Tricia's acrostic letters. I don't express how much I appreciate this class. I completely love this class. Of all the classes that I've been a part of, this is the one. I love almost half of you, by the way, and that's far and away more than I've loved any class. And
that's okay. We love that.
Yeah, that's right. But by the way, Selvin, and any of you other dudes, that doesn't mean I want you to hug me. Selvin always tries to hug me, and I just hate that stuff. I know, just don't. I'm not one of those people that calls you my beloved. But I just want you to know that I get way more out of this class than you do. And I'm sorry about that, but I get so much out of this class. And Paul is writing this out of pure joy for these people. And he just genuinely loves them. They've just given him a gift, and he loves them. And he talks about happiness and peace and all of these things, and it's all in the mind. And today's lesson is on being righteous in your thinking, it's on being content, and it's on generosity. And all those things are mind-oriented things. It's the way we think, it's the way we approach life. I remember being in basketball, and y'all know I'm hyper athletic, right? And so when I was in high school, coming home after a game, and I was just frustrated because I had been in a slump on my free throw shooting. And I was telling my parents, I just can't make a free throw. It's just killing me. And my mother said, well, that's just stinky thinking. You've got to think the ball in the hole. And I said, well, yeah, well, that's stupid. That's what that is. That's stupid. And over time, I learned that the power of the mind radically changes everything about your life and your success and your happiness and your peace. That what we think is what we are. And there was a book written not long before I was in high school by a man named Norman Vincent Peale called The Power of Positive Thinking. And in it, and I think I have it on the notes, but in it, The Power of Positive Thinking, he has 10 things, and some of these things touch on what our lesson is going to be. Number one is what my mother said, which is picture yourself succeeding. Literally see the ball in the hole. Think a positive thought to drown out a negative thought. And that's what Paul is writing about today, righteous thinking. Minimize obstacles. Literally today in contentment, we're talking about living in any circumstance. Minimize the circumstances that you're in. Don't attempt to copy others. Repeat, if God be for us, who can be against us, from Romans, 10 times a day. Work with a counselor. So Paul is telling these people, copy me, copy Epaphroditus, copy Timothy. And he does that again today. Repeat from today's lesson, I can do all things through Christ which strengthen me, at least 10 times a day. Develop strong self-respect because Christ, literally God made us. Affirm that you're in God's hands. And what that means is recognize that God is in total control. It's providence. And believe that you receive power from God, that he can strengthen you, that you can plug into his power. And that is what the mind is about. And so Romans 8:5 says, for those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit set their minds on the things of the Spirit. And the end of this section, the end of Philippians, is about setting our mind on the things of the Spirit. Before we go into today's Bible verses, let me just hit the end of the verses we had yesterday about having a peace that surpasses all understanding. And that was starting in Philippians 4:4, and it says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace which surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And that's the peace. There are two ways to approach the world, and people, depending on your mindset, see different things. They see the world entirely different. My second son, is now into duck hunting, and he has a friend that has a dog that will go retrieve you. They shoot the ducks in the pond, and the dog will swim out there and retrieve it. And it reminded me of a story of a guy that bought a hunting dog, a duck dog, and he went out by himself and he was hunting ducks, and he shoots a duck, and this dog literally runs on top of the water. He's walking on the water and retrieves this duck and comes right back, and the guy's like, oh my gracious, shoots another duck, runs out running on top of the water. And he's like, I've got a Jesus dog. This is incredible. And so he can't wait for the next weekend. And he invites his buddy to go out with him. Shoots a duck, dog runs on top of the water, retrieves the duck and comes back. His buddy doesn't say a word. Shoots another duck, runs on top of the water, comes back. And he says, did you not see this? He said, well, I didn't want to say anything, but your dog can't swim. Two completely different ways of seeing the world. You either see a Jesus dog or you see someone that can't swim. And so this is all about seeing Jesus dogs in our life. And so with that, Catherine, you want to kick us off?
Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you.
Finally, so he is literally landing the plane. He says, whatever things are true. And so as we think about truth, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He says, whatever is honorable. We're supposed to think of things that are lofty. Whatever is just. Whatever is pure. Things that are not morally filthy, but what is pure. Whatever things is lovely and commendable. And he says, if you believe these things, if you believe that there is anything excellent, then, and anything praiseworthy, think about these things. In 2019, I taught a lesson and I talked about rolling out a program at Perot Systems when I was Chief Operating Officer called the Culture of Excellence. And if you can go down, Doug, I talked about what the culture of excellence was for our company, and I applied it in the lesson to what I believe a culture of excellence should be for Christians. And that is adhering to the standard best in class, meaning we should set our standards on being the best in class that God can make us. We should not lower our standards on anything. When we talk about excellence, we have a high, lofty goal. Pursuing excellence in all that we do. We should be active in our execution of adhering to that standard. We should take actions to do something. We need to have an undying commitment to the mission, and the mission in Christianity is to glorify God. And we all glorify God in different ways, but the mission for us as Christians is to glorify God. Knowing that teamwork is a requirement, that Christianity and work is a team sport. There's no lone wolves. We're supposed to do that. And so we should aim for excellence in everything that we do. And he comes into verse 9. And Matthew 22:37, there's numerous things about thinking. And Matthew 22:37, and he said to them, you shall love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. We are, as Christians, to be thinking organisms. Christ and God and Paul don't ask us to check our brains at the door when we come in. We should chew on things. We should work through our faith. We should study. We should ask questions. We should work out things that don't make sense to us in the Bible. We have a high standard. We're supposed to think. Christ wants us to think. And Proverbs 23:7 says, for as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. What we think is exactly what we are. And you can read Mark, what comes from. In verse 9, he comes down and he says, what you've learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things. I talked about being a hyper athletic basketball player at the start. I was maniacal with my kids on how to shoot a basketball. And I studied the shot, I studied good shooters. And so from a young age, I would get out and I would say, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to have your elbow straight. I want this to be at a 90-degree angle. I want you to understand that you can move the ball up, but you load right here and you execute like that. And I would hand them the ball. This is your goal. And then I would coach them. You know, if they get their elbow out, I'm like, hey, get that in. And I would get them 4 foot out with one hand and have them shoot and make 10 in a row. Practice, practice, practice. So literally, that's how I taught the kids. And that's what Paul is saying. What you learned from me, the way you saw how I shot, when you received the ball and the tools to make the basket, what you heard in terms of the feedback, get your elbow in, what you saw as I demonstrated it, and I want you to practice every single day doing these things. Paul is saying, I'm the example. I taught you how to do this. I've given you the tools. You need to practice it. And practice is something that makes perfect. And you practice day in and day out. And that's what Paul is calling them to do. And he says, James 1:22 says we're supposed to be doers of the word, not hearers only, lest we deceive ourselves. So we're supposed to actually take action. There is something called how many of you are familiar with the Stockholm Syndrome? So there was a robbery in 1973, and there were 4 hostages taken, and they developed some kind of affinity for their captors, and they wouldn't testify at them. They had become in captivity aligned with them. And we've got to watch ourselves. There's a danger in today. I had a son that went off to do law school. And I am convinced that Stockholm Syndrome took over as he was around many people that challenged his Christianity and his thinking. And the more he was there, by year 3, he had drifted back from the things that we had taught him. Now,
Is that your youngest one who wears shorts?
no,
Oh,
so
okay.
he's back. He's back, but that's what Stockholm Syndrome is. And so while we walk through this world, we can't be totally embedded, or it'll affect us. And so you have to think about the things of Christ and practice them every day, and the God of peace will be with you. Now, we talked about the characteristics of God and omniscience and omnipresence and him being omnipotent and those things. And so we know that God is always right here, but God is not always with us because we don't always let him in. He's there and available for us, but we've got to think about these things and watch the Stockholm Syndrome so that God will truly be present with us. Sean, you want to?
I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at length you have revived your concern for me. You were indeed concerned for me, but you had no opportunity. Now that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me.
So this is about being content. Rockefeller was one of the huge, rich magnate, was asked how much money is enough. And his response was just a little bit more, just a little bit more. And so many times that's exactly the way we are, regardless of where we are in life, we want just a little bit more. And what's happened is in the past 50 years, our homes, and I'm pointing at myself as much as anything, but our homes on average are 3 times bigger than they were 50 years ago. And in terms of clothing, we have 4 times more clothing than we did 50 years ago. And you ought to come in my closet. It's amazing. Not my closet, my wife's closet, who's crowding me out. This, I'm not, just don't be defensive. So, what was
Don't be offensive.
don't what?
Don't be offensive.
Oh, okay. And so I rejoiced in the Lord greatly, and now at length you have revived your concern for me. So what had happened? You remember, Philippi was on the 2nd missionary journey. He planted that church. He had gone over. He was called by a Macedonian man. He was there at Philippi. He went to a river, and there were women praying. There wasn't a synagogue. And he eventually was thrown into prison and beaten with rods. And that night, while he's in prison, he and Silas start singing hymns in the middle of the night. And these people knew him, and from that moment, they totally loved him. And they supported him, and they became partners with him. And then he went to Thessalonica. And immediately, they send gifts. They send him by Epaphroditus 800 miles away, to Thessalonica. They send gifts there. And then Epaphroditus brings him gifts now in Rome, 800 miles away. And so they continue to do it, but it's been 10 years. 10 years since they had given their gifts. And we learn as down at the end of verse 10 that they had no opportunity. And what it means is they lacked the season. By lacking the season, they just weren't able to give. Something had happened in Philippi. Gold mines, which had used to be prevalent across all of Philippi, had gone away. They were in bad economic conditions, that the Romans were beginning to frown on Christianity. And so these people didn't have the season to give, but they truly wanted to give. And Paul, as he goes through, is content regardless of whether they gave him a gift or not. But when they give it to him, he wants them to know that they'll be blessed. And we'll talk about that in a second. But he talks about contentment here. And he says in verse 11, not that I'm speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation to be content. And then down in verse 12, he says, I have learned the secret. And so 2 things to draw from this. Number 1, contentment is not just a feeling that we have. Contentment is something that we learn. Contentment is something that we've got to practice. Going back to the coach and the basketball and practicing these things, contentment is something that we learn. And he uses a word secret. And that is a play on words from ancient religions where they would be sworn in. There would be the secret handshake. And so he's saying, I have learned the secret. I've been initiated by God into this religion, and I can live however. I can live without anything. I can live in great poverty. I can live in great prosperity. I can live in extreme conditions because I've learned how to be content. Content means that I'm satisfied with what I have, that I don't want and have no need for anything more, that I have enough today. I am content. And I can do all things. And what he's saying is, it's not that he can leap tall buildings. What he's saying is, in any situation, no matter where I am, no matter if I'm, in prison and I've been beaten with rods, no matter if I've been stoned and left for dead, no matter if I am receiving the gift, no matter if I'm shipwrecked and swimming up on an island, no matter where I am, I'm going to minimize my situation and I'm going to be content. I drew out from a pastor 4 points that I've listed on being truly content. To be truly content, we must trust the providence of God and know that he's in control. It would be hard if you're being beaten and you're chained. It would be hard if you're shipwrecked and you're with other prisoners and you're swimming. It'd be hard to truly trust that God's in control, but that's the calling. To be satisfied with a little. This is a decision that we make, that what we have is enough. To live independent of our circumstances, regardless of what you're in. And that's hard to be independent as you're driving down the road and you see some nut flashing a sign to you that you don't want. It's hard to live independent of those circumstances. And to understand and plug in to divine power. Hebrews 13:5 says, keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have, for he has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. Okay, generosity. Come on.
Yet it was kind of you to share my trouble. And you Philippians yourselves know that in the beginning of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, no church entered into partnership with me in giving and receiving, except you only. Even in Thessalonica, you sent me help for my needs once and again. Not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit and the increases to your credit. I have received full payment and more. I am well supplied, having received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent, a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. And my God will supply every need of yours according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus. To our God and Father be the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Yet it was kind of you to share in my trouble. He's like, I'm content. I didn't need this money. And that may have offended him. But he comes back in terms of this and says, but I want you to know that it was good for you to do this. I'm happy either way. I'm thrilled for you because this is going in your account. This is something that's going to be credited to you. And he actually talks in business terms. I formed a partnership. You were giving and receiving as in transacting business. This is being put to your credit. You've got an account. And what he's saying is that what you give away, what you invest is not lost. It's not lost at all. It accrues to your account, whether it's here when you give or whether it's in heaven, it's going in your account. Literally, it's a business transaction. Now, you don't give to get, but you give to glorify God and you'll be rewarded. I want to ask, I don't know how many are tithers. We should take a poll. That'd be great. Show of hands, how many tithe? But, oh, I had somebody that actually voted yes. And so, so I don't know that tithing is necessarily 10%. Tithing is 10% in the Old Testament. I think that's a good place to start in the New Testament. But I want you to imagine if Christ calculated your income based on what you gave. So if you actually, at the end of the year, look back and said, okay, well, I gave $1,000 to church, and Christ said, okay, well, that means your compensation this year is $10,000. What if he did that? Would that work? What if he only gave 10%? So think about those things. And you Philippians yourself know that at the beginning of the gospel, in other words, when he brought the gospel to Philippi, when I left Macedonia, no church entered into this partnership. No church was a part of this gospel business in giving and receiving, except only you. And even in Thessalonica, which is referred to in 2 Corinthians 11, 8, and 9, which we won't read in the interest of time, you sent me help for my needs once and again. He was only at Thessalonica a very short period of time. And they sent multiple gifts in there. Not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit that increases to your account. Literally, I have received full payment, and I am well supplied, having received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent, a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. As you went into the temple, you would have smelt on sacrificial days, you would have smelled the most amazing barbecue as drink offerings were being poured on lambs, which were being sacrificed, and it would have been an amazing smell. And so he is pointing them back to that fragrant sacrifice that's going up and saying, this is a sweet aroma to God when you give. This sacrificial giving is a sweet aroma that just like the Jews would have smelled in the temple, and it's pleasing to God. And God will supply every need, didn't say greed, every need according to his riches in Christ Jesus. To God and our Father be the glory forever and ever. And what he's saying, that's a doxology. And he's praising God for supplying our need for his great provision. So let me just close this out. Greet every saint in Christ Jesus. The brothers who are with me greet you, Timothy and Epaphroditus. All the saints greet you, especially those of Caesar's household. If you remember, he was chained up in Rome. It says in Philippians 1:12 through 13, which is not on your verses, I want you to all know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And so as he's chained to these guys, he's converting them. He has one on each side, 24 hours a day, and he is converting these people. And they are the imperial guard. The praetorian guard was the guard that guarded Caesar's household. And because he was able to spread the gospel, literally in chains, he was able to impact Caesar's household. And so this is just a great, great book, a lovely, lovely book. Next week, we will complete whatever it takes for witnessing, and my colleague Brian will be teaching, and it's going to be a really neat lesson that will not be based on the scripture, but may have some scripture references. Is that right?
I hope so.
I hope so. Okay, well, there may be. There will be. And we'll have the pastor's wife and her class will join us. And so I've asked Brian not to cuss and to be on best behavior. That's right, best behavior for once.
All right, let's go ahead and go to Lord in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we do lift up Judy to you today, and we just thank you for her life. Thank you for her influence and friendship in this class. Pray, Lord, that if there is medication, if there is something that can be taken, that will help her, give her maybe a freedom in her mind to think more clearly, and just pray, Lord, for her, and just pray for her son, that he will find time and have time to take her to these doctor visits and just continue to have his presence and show his love for his mother. And Lord, we do just lift up this world, lift up Israel, those that are in battles right now, Lord, that your divine intervention will take hold. And once again, just give us the love and the passion to serve you and to minister and share the gospel. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.